So Ryan, tell me, what's on your radar?
So this weekend, two of the Democratic Party's favorite boogeymen burst out of their closets to remind everybody they're still around. They, of course, are Joe Manchin and the Senate Parliamentarian, a staffer named Elizabeth McDonough. Manchin, for his part, is now saying he wants a, quote, strategic pause on the party's $3.5 trillion reconciliation package until 2022. And the Parliamentarian has told Democratic leaders she doesn't think their version of immigration reform qualifies under the rules of reconciliation. As a reminder, she is merely a staffer offering advice. It's the Senate that is elected by voters to make decisions. If they punt it off to her, they're not doing their job. Schumer so far is sort of taking her opinion as a ruling, and he's vowing to send a new draft her way to see what she thinks. The other option would be for the chair of the Senate, whether it's Kamala Harris or somebody else, to simply ignore her take and allow it. Either way, we're now embarking on what are likely to be the most important 4 to 8 weeks of non-electoral political maneuvering in more than 50 years. K Street has an incredible advantage because they have an army of people paid to pay attention and look for every way to stop it between now and then. But a confluence of incentives has put Bernie Sanders, AOC, Chuck Schumer, and Nancy Pelosi on the same side of this fight. And the question is whether they have the muscle to power through the handful of holdouts like Manchin. The way this fight is shaping up is confusing enough to get people to stop paying attention, but I wanted to take today to lay out how it's going to go so people can follow it in real time. If it passes, the U.S. will have pivoted in a major way toward a clean energy economy, and that'll help bring the world along behind us. And we'll also have reoriented our social policy to start giving monthly cash assistance to nearly all families with children, while also funding senior care, expanding Medicare, expanding Medicaid, and otherwise making this a much less barbaric society. Media outlets, though, continue to struggle with the complex parliamentary maneuvers required to enable legislation to move through the Senate with a simple majority under the process known as reconciliation. The confusion has led to multiple cycles of coverage suggesting that this or that Democratic priority had been killed or this or that provision had been approved. But in reality, the bill is still being written, and its ultimate authors are still picking from among the various pieces of text to pass through committees, ditching other elements, and adding some that never went through the process. The destination for the legislation is the House Budget Committee and, most importantly, finally, the House floor. Last week, Democratic Representatives Kathleen Rice, Scott Peters, and Kurt Schrader were the focus of significant and well-earned ire for blocking a measure in the Energy and Commerce Committee that would allow Medicare to negotiate drug prices directly with pharmaceutical companies. Now, there's no single policy priority that Democrats have spent more time promising voters they'd accomplish if given the opportunity. But the trio's theatrical votes against the provision by no means doom it. Party leadership can reinsert it through a so-called manager's amendment, meaning that those three members' opinions on drug pricing are only worth caring about if they are strong enough to drive them to vote down the whole package. And if a member is opposed to the bill entirely, as Schrader has suggested that he is, then what he thinks of an individual provision is meaningless. Only his vote on the House floor matters. Both Peters and Rice, for their part, are expected to vote to approve the final package on the House floor if it gets there, having made their stand on behalf of Big Pharma in committee. So why did they make a show of voting against it in committee? The industry has flooded nearly $90,000 this year to Peters and has been steadily airing ads thanking him for his support in his district. Rice's reasoning is a bit more obscure. Although Big Pharma has only given just over $6,000 to Rice in the same time frame, the industry's stakeholders are some of the New York Democrats' biggest donors. A former Nassau County prosecutor, Rice ran for New York Attorney General in 2010 and heavily weighed a second bid in 2018 before bowing out. She's considered a likely candidate the next time the position opens up, and given the higher ambitions of AG Letitia James, that might not be long. New York's campaign finance laws give outsized influence to major donors, and winning over just a few billionaires can guarantee a well-funded race. An executive at Novo Nordisk's largest shareholder, hedge fund Renaissance Technologies, and his relatives have collectively given Rice Victory Fund, a PAC affiliated with her, more than $100,000 in the past 3 election cycles. Now, the committee that matters, the Budget Committee, is chaired by Representative John Yarmuth of Kentucky, who is an outspoken progressive and has recently become an adherent of modern monetary theory, a deficit-friendly approach to economics. The rising importance of the typically obscure panel was underscored this weekend when Yarmouth was invited to appear on Fox News Sunday with Chris Wallace. Yarmouth suggested the floor vote for the final package would slip past the September 27th deadline and into early October, but he expressed little doubt that the prescription drug provision would make its way back in.
You had a number of the more moderate members of your caucus vote against that. How are you going to resolve that?
Right. Well, I know that at least two of them have said they actually want negotiation with Medicare to take place. They just didn't like the mechanism that was in the Energy and Commerce legislation. So there are ideas I know coming out of the Senate on this. I'm not sure there are very many in the Democratic caucus on either side of the building that actually are opposed to negotiation on prices of prescription drugs. I just think it's the methodology we use.
The reference to the Senate brings in another complication to the process. Many House Democrats are loath to vote on a large tax and spending bill that then dies in the Senate, creating pressure for what's known as, quote, pre-conferencing, which is effectively a deal between the House and Senate that is arrived at before the conference committee between the two chambers meets. That means the manager's amendment being negotiated along the way is being constructed with winning Manchin's support in mind. Peters, for his part, also happens to sit on the Budget Committee, where he can again register his objection harmlessly because the rest of the committee is broadly supportive of the drug pricing effort. Other than Peters, there aren't a whole lot of Democrats on the committee to worry about, which also includes progressives such as Barbara Lee, Pramila Jayapal, Jan Schakowsky. One member who does have a centrist voting record, Jim Cooper of Tennessee, is facing a serious primary challenge from the left back in his district. The threat ought to help keep him on board. The Budget Committee, as a result of the structural corruption on which Washington's political economy is built, is generally more progressive than more powerful committees like Ways and Means or Energy and Commerce. It comes down to fundraising. The latter committees have jurisdiction over the economy's major power centers. Therefore, those industries shower members of those committees with campaign donations, like a host shaping itself strategically and synergistically with a parasite. Members of Congress who are most eager for corporate contributions tend to be the ones who fight for spots on the committee and ones who are awarded those spots by leadership. Naturally, that means more corporate-friendly members wind up stocking the most powerful committees, tipping their politics in that direction. The concentration of those members on powerful committees means that less powerful committees like Budget, Education and Labor, Judiciary wind up being stacked with progressives. Under regular order, that situation works out very well for corporate lobbyists. But in a reconciliation process that empowers the Budget Committee, it's a less effective defense against this landmark piece of legislation. On the House floor, Democrats can afford to lose just 3 votes, and both Schrader and Stephanie Murphy of Florida are expected to be no's. Representative Jared Golden of Maine, he's always a tough get for Democrats. But one formerly reliable no vote, Representative Dan Lipinski of Illinois, was knocked into retirement in 2020 thanks to a progressive primary challenge by the seat's current incumbent, Marie Newman, who is expected to vote yes. Meanwhile, progressives have promised to vote as a bloc against the bipartisan infrastructure bill if a reconciliation deal isn't finished yet. The floor vote is the fight that matters, as factions are jockeying to make sure their provision makes it into the version of the bill that hits the Budget Committee and survives to make it to the floor. The advocacy group Patriotic Millionaires, which is made up of wealthy people explicitly lobbying for tax increases on themselves and their 1% comrades, is pushing to equalize rates on ordinary income and capital gains over $1 million. That's according to founder Erica Payne. What they're doing is they're aiming to go around the Ways and Means Committee straight to the manager's amendment. Patriotic Millionaires admonished House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Richard Neal of Massachusetts for excluding that tax reform from his proposal in defiance of President Joe Biden, who has endorsed the change. If the House becomes immovable, the Senate is also an option. In the face of steep opposition from the agriculture lobby, House Democrats have drawn a line against Biden's effort to force inheritors of great wealth to pay taxes on capital gains. As a result, Patriotic Millionaires, for instance, is targeting the Senate to axe this benefit with the goal of getting both reforms into the final bill during conference negotiations. This is the kind of multi-trillion-dollar jockeying that's going to be going on for the next few weeks, and it's likely to shape the kind of country we are for the next few decades. The whole process is idiotic and only being done this way because Democrats won't just get rid of the filibuster. So, Alyssa, we're kind of trying to reshape our economy over the next 4 to 8 weeks, maybe 12 weeks if it drags on that long. And this is the Byzantine process that we have to deal with. You worked on Capitol Hill for a long time. Have you ever seen a confluence of so many different bizarre kind of parliamentary mechanisms crash into each other before? Would the 2017 tax cut that Trump got through count, or did they rush that through so quick that it wasn't as complicated?
So this actually brought to mind the Republicans' efforts to repeal and replace Obamacare back, and I think that would have been 2016. We ran into some issues with the Senate Parliamentarian not allowing defunding of Planned Parenthood and blocking any sort of payments for abortion. What I thought was interesting, and I was waiting because you gave us a lot to unpack, that final point, it actually just comes down to if Democrats would or wouldn't eliminate the filibuster. Right. Instead, we're giving kind of an undue amount of authority to someone who technically is a staffer, the Senate Parliamentarian. That said, what becomes interesting, I think the most interesting point you made is that the Budget Committee, which is generally seen as, we call it, a B committee. It's not an A committee. It's not the one that the
money committee.
It's not a money committee.
On Capitol Hill, they literally call them money
committees. Correct. The Budget Committee oftentimes is just drawing up budgets that then nobody actually adheres to. It's more of an aspirational document, but in the process of reconciliation, it's incredibly important because that becomes the parameters for which all the other spending goes through. So I think it's very interesting. It empowers these progressives who are stacking the committee to be able to influence things. But I'm bullish on Joe Manchin's not going to budge on this. He was very clear he wants to punt this into 2022. I would be curious about that approach because you are doing it timed with an election, which could go one of two ways. I think most people think the Republicans are going to take back the House. The Senate is kind of a different question. The calculation, I think, for both the White House and Capitol Hill for Leader Schumer is, does it help Democrats in the midterms to punt this to 2022 and make it something to tout on the campaign trail? Or is it better to get it done now ahead of what's very much going to be a very contentious election period that does favor Republicans? What's
ironic, and I'm curious for your take on this, if they had gotten rid of the filibuster, let's say 10 years ago when progressives were pushing for it then, they'd gotten rid of the filibuster. So we're in a world right now today where there is no filibuster. 50 vote is all you need. In some ways, they might not be trying to cram as much in at the same time. Like the fact that they only have one shot, this one reconciliation bill that they can put everything in, including immigration reform, including the PRO Act, including all of these things they're trying to stuff in there, then kind of pressures them to put as much as they possibly can in. Like, it's like, somebody who's given 6 weeks to live is going to live, a much fuller life than somebody who hasn't been.
Well, and I'm personally an institutionalist. I don't think you should get rid of the filibuster. And I think that it's actually good to have the backstop of the Senate Parliamentarian because I don't think you should have these massive omnibus packages where you're putting legislation that are just so disconnected from each other, not germane to one another, into something like this. But it's the inevitable turnout of not being able to govern in any major way for a significant period of time and trying to force an entire agenda in a quick period. Republicans do it. We did it with Obamacare repeal. We did it with tax cuts. Democrats are now doing it. I would say that I think that giving this much authority, though, to a staffer is interesting. I think that we've talked about immigration before, though. This is something that I think that Democrats could actually try to do something before 2022, and they could do it as a separate package. I'd actually be curious your thoughts if they just purely tried to pass a separate immigration package outside of reconciliation.
I don't see how you get 10 Republicans to do anything that involves a pathway to citizenship because they want to do. They want to do not just Dreamers. They want to do TPS holders. Those are people who came from other countries because there was a crisis there, right, but the country's still in crisis. They want to do frontline workers. They want to do up to like 10 million people, and there's no way that you're going to get 10 Republicans, or maybe even 2.
That's the important answer, because if it was a more moderate package that perhaps didn't include all those provisions, I think you could get some of the moderate-leaning senators. But therein lies the problem that we're facing.
Right, they want to do more. But yeah, looking forward to seeing what's on your radar up next.